I've agreed to take on this fix project of a broken cedar plank canoe. You'll have to get the background story in our full restoration video, but it needed all kinds of help. So in order to put the hull back together, we really do need to use epoxy, but all by itself it's kind of thin and runny. So if you add some wood flour to it, or for that matter you can empty the shavings out of your sander bag, you can thicken up the epoxy so that it stays in place when you're trying to glue these big cracks back together. If you add more to it, it gets to the consistency of like peanut butter, and it turns out to be a great filler for stiffening up the stem and the stern of this canoe. It's obviously going to be waterproof, it sticks, and it adds some strength. And that needs to be done because on this particular canoe design, there's no exterior wood stem and stern. So you need to harden the leading edges of the canoe. And using the peanut butter epoxy on the inside and some additional fiberglass tape on the outside, we're going to have a pretty strong stem and stern for this canoe. One of the hardest things to do is to figure out how to sand the inside curve of the canoe. Using one of these cheap little foam pads that you use for gardening, they're not very expensive and they're pretty shapeable. And that's actually what I did to this guy. But all you want to do is, in fact, this was an inexpensive sander. I started with something that I thought I might ruin. This was all at $13 at a local big box home improvement store, and I cut this out to fit that, and as it turns out, this particular curvature was perfect for getting on the inside of that canoe curve. Now to make that, what you need is just a square cutout that matches the bottom of the pad, and then what we're going to do is we're going to shave off some of the perimeter here on the edges to give us that natural curve. We'll leave a part of it flat because this is still pretty soft and it'll compress. But if you don't happen to have a saw with really sharp teeth like this, you can also use a serrated bread knife. And all I'm going to do is get into it a little bit, start it off flat, curve it on down till I take off about half of that thickness. We just use a little spray glue and stick it to the bottom of the pad. So one of the things we wound up using was this belt sander material, and I found some 4-inch belt that matched the little sander that I had. And you don't want to bother with these square sanding sheets that you get at the hardware store because they just don't last. But the fabric-based belt sander material with aluminum oxide grit, this stuff lasts forever. And if you use the 40 grit, it really takes down the high spots and the edges on the inside of the canoe, the stuff that's really hard to get to any other way. And then you can vary the grits and get a smoother finish with 80, 120, and so forth. So this turns out to be my 4th wood and fiberglass watercraft project. One of the things I've learned over time is that you don't want to start on the ends of a canoe like this and work towards the middle. The fabric just tends to bunch up and you have a hard time getting it smooth. So don't do that. Start off in the middle and work the fabric towards both ends and you'll find it to be a much smoother finish. The challenge is you need to use epoxy that's got a slow curing hardener so you've got time to work. You're just going to love this little demo. Now, I wound up using cherry for my canoe, but most forums will recommend using ash, which is fine, but absolutely don't go to the home center and buy red oak or pine. This was filmed in real time, and if you watch to the right-hand side of the red oak, it just sucks up moisture, and ultimately this stuff rots, and it rots fast. Now in the end, I wound up going with cherry because it's got a little bit more of a finished furniture look to it. When you tip it up on its edge, you don't see the grain as much as you would see ash, and I think this is going to look fantastic for our canoe. So very often you can't get lumber that's exactly 14 feet long or 16 feet long, and you're going to have to scarf a couple of joints. And you can try to cut it with a handsaw, but it's just not going to come out that great. So it helps to build a jig to give you exact cuts for every two pieces that you have to put together. In this particular case, this is just a cheap piece of 1/2-inch chipboard or wafer board. And I've got a 3/4 inch strip that I've glued to the bottom that'll allow me to slide on this groove and keep a 90-degree push angle to the blade. So with that in place, I actually cut the lumber a little bit long, and then I ran it through the table saw to give me one clean edge at the edge of the blade. Now on a scarf joint, my cherry wood material is 3/4 of an inch by 1 inch. So it'll actually sit up like this on my out wale and my in wale. And I'm going to want to cut the scarf joint this way. Now to do that, the rule is to multiply the width of your lumber by 8. So we're going to want an angle cut that's 6 inches long that can cover our 3/4 inch width. And that's what I've done with this little ledger board, is set up a 6-inch cut at 3/4 of an inch deep. And then I've got this glued down also, set up with a couple of hold down clamps for that lumber, and I'll show you how that's going to work. And so the cherry wood will fit nice and tight in there. I'm going to want to extend this out a little bit because I want to take a full angled cut. These two clamps, which I got from Harbor Freight, they were only a couple bucks a piece. Lock it down, and then I can slide the entire piece of lumber across the blade and give me exact cuts every time. And that is a beautifully clean cut. And when I cut the other piece of lumber like this and I put the two pieces together with epoxy, it's going to be a great joint. You'll never see it.
Again,